Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
It was the early hours of the 26th of December 1980, and a 20-year-old John Burroughs was in a police cruiser. A USAF airman, he had been stationed at the twin bases of Bentwaters and Woodbridge since July the previous year. Located in Suffolk, England, the two Royal Air Force bases were being leased by the British Ministry of Defence to the American Air Force, so as to provide a crucial rearward maintenance centre for troops on the front line in Germany. This was the Cold War, and anything could happen. It was for that reason that Burroughs and his watch supervisor, Bud Parker, were driving inside the perimeter fence at Woodbridge, close to the east gate where the runway ends and the thick pines of Rendlesham Forest began. Members of the law enforcement branch of the Air Force, it was their job to perform patrols and ensure the safety of the base. It was therefore of importance when the men noticed something strange in the trees beyond the base. Lights, but not emitted by anything normal as far as the two airmen were concerned. And so, getting out of their vehicle so as to open the gate which marked the edge of USAF jurisdiction, Burroughs and Parker drove along a forestry commission track into the trees. "I was scared," Burroughs revealed many years later. He had what he described as a very weird feeling. There was something unusual about the lights he and his supervisor were seeing. There was at first just one, a big, low light in the sky which appeared to fall into the forest. As it did, it changed, appearing as a mass of multicolored glowing lights, largely blue and red. There was also a white glow, which is said to have increased in brightness as Burroughs stood on the edge of the forest. Unsure as to what they were looking at, Burroughs and Parker decided to return to the gatehouse and report the incident to the law enforcement desk sergeant. They were told to stay where they were and await the arrival of a security patrol. What would follow in the opening hours of Boxing Day 1980 would forever be remembered as the best documented UFO encounter to have occurred in Britain, Europe, and quite possibly even the world. My name is Laura, and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar. Before we delve too deep into this case, if you could please entertain a brief intrusion and allow me to thank the sponsor of this video, TEMU. TEMU is an online marketplace that stocks just about any product you can imagine at highly competitive prices. Great for gifts, especially toys, crafts, and home, TEMU has hundreds of product categories for you to explore. In fact, many of the home decor items that you see beside me actually came from TEMU, including this rather lovely print of John William Waterhouse's The Magic Circle. I've also had the chance to put some of their more niche paranormal investigative equipment to the test, including several EMF meters, LED cat balls, and a laser grid torch. In fact, I've actually put together a whole video on my second channel, which I encourage you to watch to see, amongst other things, how these items perform against costlier alternatives. After all, this EMF meter, for example, is highly affordable, currently costing just $17, making it the perfect option for your ghost hunting toolkit. I also particularly enjoyed this wooden spirit board, which, if you know me, is one of my most used paranormal tools. It has a lovely design and a surprising weight to it, all while still being portable enough for me to take with me to an investigation. And not only are their products ideal, TEMU also offers great customer service with their no quibbles guaranteed delivery or your money back policy, making their marketplace a safe option for your holiday shopping. They also offer free shipping and free returns for up to 90 days. And so why not join the millions of others who are already shopping and download the TEMU app through my link. Type my exclusive code in the search bar and you will get an extra 30% off your first purchase on the app. Thank you for watching and thus helping to support my channel. Now, on with the video. Sergeant Jim Penniston was the Central Security Control Officer sent to attend the incident at RAF Woodbridge's East Gate. Upon arrival, he was directed towards Rendlesham Forest by Burroughs and Parker. There, he observed multiple coloured lights on the edge of the forest inside the trees. Believing it to be a fire, the sort of thing you might get from chemicals burning after an air crash, he asked the two airmen if they saw the plane go down. Their response confused the seasoned sergeant. There had been no crash, it had simply landed. At this, Penniston knew he would have to go into the trees so as to investigate. And so, once clearance was given by Central Security Control for the sergeant to leave the base, he and Burroughs checked in their weapons and entered the forest. They only had to drive 100 yards or so past the gate for their radio contact with the base to break. Eerie and unusual, the lights in the trees were still plainly visible, and so the men continued deeper into the woods, Penniston certain that they were about to encounter a crash site. That, however, was not at all what they found. Rather, according to the two men's testimonies, shared many years after the initial incident, in Penniston's case a Halt 14, what they stumbled across in Rendlesham Forest at 2:30 a.m. on the 26th of December 1980 was categorically not an air crash. On the ground, some 30 feet in front of them, was a craft. The size of a tank, triangular and very smooth with no sharp edges and a surface that resembled semi-transparent black glass, it made absolutely no sound. It was, however, illuminated by light that somehow appeared to emerge from the background of the object. Said to have been a very brilliant white light with multicolored lights inside, such meant that the entire forest appeared aglow. So startled by the sight were Burroughs and Penniston that they immediately threw themselves to the forest floor. Utterly terrified, with faces to the dirt, the two military men went on to allege that the object secreted some manner of strange energy, almost as if time and space were being distorted within its vicinity. It felt almost like static electricity, Burroughs has reported. I had never felt a sensation quite like that before. I do not really know how to phrase this, but it was as if I was moving in slow motion. Uncertain as to whether or not he still had control over his body, the airman could only remain on the ground. Penniston independently described a similar sensation of bizarre otherworldliness, expressing how there was a sense of slowness, like time itself was an effort. And so it was that Burroughs and Penniston fought to regain composure. The former believes they spent only a couple of minutes observing the strangeness, the latter no more than 20. And yet, by the time the craft flew off, climbing skyward into a blur, and the men returned to the gatehouse, a whole hour had passed. Burroughs and Penniston could not explain what they had seen, were reluctant even to speak of it, and yet the base's radar had also tracked an unidentified object at around 2 a.m. Not only that, the airmen were later officially advised that British forces knew of no aircraft that should have been above Rendlesham Forest that morning. And so, the lights and strange black glass triangle in the forest were a mystery. Following procedure, British police were immediately informed, with a patrol arriving shortly after 4 a.m. One of the officers sent to the site, however, seemed to be more concerned with rabbits than anything else, dismissing what Burroughs told him and the 3 physical impressions left on the forest floor by the object that they had seen as the burrows of the forest-dwelling animals. Perhaps Burroughs and his colleague had simply confused the lighthouse for the strange lights that they had allegedly seen in the forest, the police officer suggested. Orford Ness Lighthouse was, after all, only 5 miles away, and it was easy for foreigners, even military men such as Burroughs, to get disoriented in the dark. Rabbits and lighthouses. Strangely, the very same explanations would be rehashed and repeated again and again by pound-shop skeptics in the media for years to come, as would the claim propagated by the ordinarily reputable New Scientist magazine that the airmen had simply seen the lights of the police patrol car through the trees. The same police patrol car that had been called out an hour afterwards in response to the event that is allegedly being debunked. And so, a time-travelling vehicle instead of a mysterious black triangle. Logic perfected. Such gives an immediate sense of the layers of denial and truly desperation associated with this case. Indeed, the events of December 1980, or as they are now collectively known, the Rendlesham Forest Incident, represent a cover-up of massive proportions. Or, as the prominent UFO researcher and author Jenny Randles has put it, the ultimate game of information, disinformation, misinformation. For certainly, Rendlesham is in many ways the British equivalent of Roswell, a tremendously well-documented episode in the annals of the inexplicable, comprising military documents, concealed or otherwise, the now infamous live tape recording of events by a senior USAF colonel, radar data, and over 50 civilian and military witnesses. It also spanned 3 days, resulting in a complex sequence of events often poorly explained. A narrative confused by the vast amount of drama that unfolded in a relatively short space of time. For truly, there can be said to have been 2 major incidents that took place that Christmas in Rendlesham, with the second of the 2 being the one most often referenced. Despite his vast amount of experience in the US Air Force, Colonel Charles Halt is undoubtedly best known for being the man who saw objects extraterrestrial in origin in Rendlesham Forest in December 1980. These are, after all, his own words, issued in June 2010 as a notarized affidavit. In this, Colonel Halt not merely summarized the alleged events of the Rendlesham incident, but also accused the security services of both the United States and the United Kingdom of having attempted, both then and now, to subvert the significance of what occurred at Rendlesham Forest and RAF Bentwaters by the use of well-practiced methods of disinformation. Again, a cover-up of massive proportions. And rather than merely be referring to the black glass triangle observed in the early hours of the 26th, Halt was also directly referencing his own experience in the same patch of British forest less than 48 hours later, when he, as Deputy Base Commander, was forced to abandon the base's Christmas party to investigate what was reported to be at the time the return of the mysterious object first seen by Burroughs and Penniston. Assembling a team of 4 others to take with him, by the time Colonel Halt entered Rendlesham Forest it was just after midnight, and thus the small hours of Sunday the 28th of December. Armed with cameras, Geiger counters, and a tape recorder, the airmen left their vehicles and set off on foot. According to the live tape recording made by Halt that day, at around 150 feet or more from the initial suspected impact point, they experienced difficulty with the large gas-powered searchlights they had brought with them. There seemed to be some kind of mechanical problem, a problem which would persist all night, resulting in only one of about half a dozen lights to work, albeit with intermittent problems of its own. The men also experienced issues with their radios. Regardless, they moved deeper into the trees. When Halt and his men eventually arrived at the suspected landing site, they experienced an uptick on their Geiger counters. The readings were unexpectedly high and seemed to correlate with their proximity to the so-called pod marks that were still visible on the forest floor from 2 days prior, being described at the time as residual readings. Listening to Colonel Halt's tape recording, which he made throughout their investigation, one can hear the panic in the men's voices as the reading continued to climb.
Looks like an area here, possibly. It could be a blast. It's in the center of the triangle. You're going to take us my fingers about 3 minutes. Here's 2. Up to what, 7? What? Just jumped up to 7 tenths there. 7 tenths right here in the center?
And such a sense of panic and excitement can be said to have sustained, and indeed magnified, as the investigation in the woods continued. The marks on the ground were examined further, with measurements and even photographs now declassified being taken by USAF personnel. Additionally, in Colonel Halt's tape recording, we hear from one of the men how it looked like something twisted as it sat down on them.
Looks like someone took something and sat it down and twisted it from side to side. Very strange.
According to Halt's later written memo, these 3 depressions measured 1.5 inches deep and 7 inches in diameter. As for the radiation readings, beta-gamma readings of 0.1 milliröntgens were recorded with peak readings in the 3 depressions and near the center of the triangle formed by the depressions. A nearby tree also had moderate readings on the side of the tree towards the same depressions. In the tape recording, we also hear how, by using the infrared beam of a starlight scope, the tree was revealed to have a white streak on it, which indicated a heat source.
We're looking at the same tree we took the sample off with this, what do you call it, star scope? Starlight.
getting a definite heat reflection off the tree, about 3 to 4 feet off the ground.
Presumably, these anomalous readings were residuals from the events that took place on the 26th. As Colonel Halt's investigation continued, he and his men moved further into the forest. Ultimately, and sensationally, they found themselves in pursuit of something indisputably odd. What would later be described in Halt's written report as a red sun-like light.
You just saw a light where? Where?
Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flashlight there. So there it is.
Hey, I see it too. What is it?
We don't know, sir.
So, can I get some? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everything else is just deathly calm. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird.
Said to have moved about and pulsed erratically, at one point the light appeared to throw off glowing particles, after which it somewhat shockingly broke into 5 separate white objects and then disappeared in the sky. The encounter not yet over, a further 3 so-called strange lights in the sky were observed, objects said to have displayed red, green and blue lights. At first elliptical, they supposedly turned to full circles. Then, sometime after that, arguably the most sensational moment of the night occurred. The beaming down of a stream of white light.
Oh, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
Throughout, animals both wild in the forest and domesticated on nearby farmland were said to have been very, very active and making an awful lot of noise. When the men finally returned to base, they were exhausted and utterly dumbfounded. Undoubtedly, given his continuing support for something unusual, possibly even extraterrestrial, having happened that night, Colonel Halt was left profoundly affected by his Rendlesham Forest experience. In the new year, on the 13th of January 1981, he submitted a brief written report to the UK Ministry of Defence, famously titled Unexplained Lights, expecting to be summoned so as to answer questions and provide further information. The call from a superior, however, never came, with the incident being largely hushed up and forgotten. For certainly, Halt aside, many of the airmen who witnessed something strange in Rendlesham Forest over the course of those few nights soon found themselves relocated to other military installations. Scared to talk about what they had seen, they continued their work in silence, with little information reaching the public in those first few weeks. After all, Halt's memo, now infamous in UFO circles, was kept a secret and out of public hands for a full 2 years until 1983, when the Freedom of Information Act forced the hand of the US government. The year afterwards, a copy of his tape was also released, this time not officially, but rather as a leak sent out to UFO researchers by a military insider. And yet, for all of the military hush-hush, it had, for those on the ground and in the area, been immediately clear that something strange had indeed taken place from the night of the 25th through to the early hours of the 28th of December. After all, USAF servicemen were not the only ones to have seen things. That we have such abundant civilian testimony in this case is thanks to the work of local researchers Brenda Butler and Dot Street, who worked with UFO author Jenny Randles to put together the first comprehensive book on the Rendlesham Forest incident, Sky Crash, A Cosmic Conspiracy. Said to have trawled pubs and other social venues in the area, Butler and Street took it upon themselves to find any and every person who had something to say about the strange sights in the sky that Christmas. One such witness was Jerry Harris. The owner of a small garage near Woodbridge, it was early Boxing Day morning, and thus the day of the first incident, when he and his wife spotted a blinding light above Rendlesham Forest. Similar is the account of the Webb family, who were driving home late on the road close to the forest at around 2:30 a.m, when they allegedly spotted what they first thought was a star following them. The sight was so strange that they stopped at the first opportunity. And so it was, from a roadside lay-by, that they observed a huge glow illuminating Rendlesham Forest, very much similar to that described by Airmen Burroughs and Penniston. Father Roy Webb's testimony is recorded in one of Jenny Randall's books on the incident. It was hovering and close by and completely silent. It accelerated from a standing start and shot across the sky. It disappeared in a couple of seconds. Undoubtedly, this is very similar to military testimony. There were even strange sightings across the county border into Norfolk, where a food production manager called Tony Sorrell alleged to have seen a triangle-shaped object moving along in the sky as he returned from his house after locking the shed door. This was late on Saturday the 27th, and thus would have directly coincided with reports made on the RAF base of the return of the unidentified flying object, the same reports which ultimately sent Colonel Halt and his team of men into the forest. Perhaps the most shocking of all, however, comes from Gordon Levitt, whose rural home was situated on the edge of Rendlesham Forest. It was late, and he was putting his dog outside into its kennel, when both he and the animal were inexplicably drawn towards the night sky. There was an object, eerie and glowing, in the heavens above them. This UFO is said to have descended and flew in the direction of Levitt and his dog. Supposedly, it hovered for a few seconds over his garden at twice the height of the rooftops, before speeding away and disappearing over the woods in the direction of RAF Woodbridge. The next day, Levitt's dog is said to have shown signs of illness and distress, refusing, contrary to its usually fierce nature, to leave its kennel. A week or so later, the animal tragically died, with a vet suggesting that it seemed to have succumbed to some sort of poisoning. And so, truly, something odd seems to have taken place those few nights. Not only that, there are rumours and reports of hard evidence radar data confirming that something strange was active in the sky that December, including the testimony of air traffic controller Malcolm Scurra. One such anomaly, so Scurra claimed, was so fast and unusual, achieving an altitude of 90,000 feet in 5 minutes, that it was unable to be intercepted by the 2 RAF Phantoms that were scrambled in pursuit. In addition to suspected military data, there exist claims from Civil Aviation Authority operators. It has even been reported that a passenger jet witnessed a brilliant explosion mid-air in the sky towards Felixstowe, a town situated on the coast a mere 10 miles from the alleged Rendlesham landing site. Intriguingly, there are also reports from the British Astronomical Association of unusually high levels of space activity on the night of the 25th, only a few hours before Burrough and Penistons's Black Triangle Forest encounter. But before we lose ourselves, it must be stated that, as incredible as much of this seems to be, undoubtedly some of what was seen those nights over Rendlesham Forest and the surrounding area will be able to be explained away in terms of comets and space junk. For indeed, at least one known object, the burn-up of a Soviet satellite, Cosmos 749, was known to have re-entered the Earth's atmosphere at just past 9 p.m. on Christmas evening. Such may account for some of the bright lights and explosions sighted. And yet, even considering this, it would be disingenuous to blame all sightings from this period on space junk and fireballs, most especially when considered alongside everything else that has been claimed. For, as strange, shocking, and sensational as the testimonies of Colonel Charles Halt, Sergeant Jim Peniston, and John Burroughs are, there are other, even more incredible testimonies to be found in regards to the Rendlesham Forest incident. Arguably most famous are the claims made by the then 19-year-old USAF security policeman Larry Warren. On his first tour of duty at RAF Bentwaters when the incident occurred, he came forward in early 1983 to speak of what happened, making him the first military witness to do so. And whilst much of what he has said does match the testimonies of others, for example Colonel Halt and the men's struggle with the gas-fueled searchlights, there is also much that goes far beyond anything that is generally claimed to have happened between the 25th and the 28th of December. In short, we are talking about the presence of alien beings, something which other witnesses, including Charles Halt and John Burroughs, have explicitly denied. Even so, according to Larry Warren, they were there that night. Not only that, he claims to have observed senior USAF airmen interact with 3 non-human life forms. Discussing that night in various interviews, Warren has explained how he was part of a 5-man group told to move off into the forest at around 11:30 p.m. Claiming to have been an airman first class with a secret clearance, Warren states that the first thing he saw was a giant yellowish-green translucent object on the ground. 50 feet across and a foot in height, it was, so Warren claims, like a platform attached to the ground rather than hovering. Beyond this object, he could see a farmer's house with a light on and a car in the driveway. According to Warren, there was no heat and no sound, and time seemed to be at half speed. Some men ran off in fear. He, in utter shock, remained. He claims that what happened next matches up with part of what Halt and his team, separate from Warren's, observed through the trees from a distance of around 200 yards. Specifically, the red blinking light was that which Larry Warren encountered. It supposedly came from around the back of the translucent object. Inside the light were 3 small beings, or, in Warren's words, what you'd only describe as children. Around 4 to 4.5 feet tall, they were supposedly very bright and translucent at points. Their faces, however, were said to have been very clear, and very clearly not human. They weren't from here at all. At this point, Warren and the remaining other men are said to have approached the beings and had what he has described as a visual standoff. After that, the lower-ranking men, himself included, were called off and told to retreat. Sensationally, the entirety of this close encounter of the third kind is said by Warren to have been filmed via tripod-mounted video cameras. Where this footage is today, or if it even exists, is not known. Undoubtedly, this is an incredible story, making it easy to understand why Larry Warren is considered a highly controversial figure in this case. Despite there being some anonymous claims to support him, other named military witnesses have turned on him, and even Nick Pope, the vocal former head of the British MOD's UFO desk, got into an online spat with him as recently as 2017, with Pope branding Warren's story lies and officially dead. And yet, as dubious as some of Warren's claims may be, if one is so minded, it is not impossible to cast nearly every military figure involved in this case as suspect. From the notoriously problematic "I'm on the MOD's payroll but just want to help" Nick Pope, to those at the very heart of the Rendlesham Forest incident, this case is riddled with inconsistencies, misdirections, and straight oddities. For example, for all of his transparency, especially after his retirement in 1991, Colonel Halt provided incorrect dates for the 2 incidents in his infamous January 1981 memo. Rather than the 26th and the 28th, it is reported to be the 27th and the 29th. An innocent error perhaps, but problematic given the nature of what we are discussing. Similar is the notebook allegedly kept by Central Security Control Sergeant Jim Penniston, said to have been hastily scribbled in as the events of the 26th of December unfolded before his very eyes, when he and John Burroughs approached the Black Triangle and experienced time distortion. It too is misdated to the 27th. There is also said to have been an issue with the original incident being recorded in the base's logbook, doing little to alleviate concerns of date inconsistencies and conflicting reports. When Penniston was asked why his supposedly of-the-night diary entry appeared to be incorrectly dated, he is said to have simply shrugged the concern away, replying that the figures in his notebook are the actual time and date of the event. When researcher Jenny Randalls asked Colonel Halt a similar question regarding the date issue in his memo, he is said to have been similarly nonchalant. "I was asked by the British officer on the base to pen this report to London, but they already knew all about the case. It was deliberately muted and left things out." The suggestion thus being that providing a correct date was irrelevant. Then why bother giving a date at all? Indeed, why give specific measurements, such as the 1.5-inch deep impression in the ground? Surely all of this seems a little strange. And call me unduly suspicious, but it can be also said to be distinctly strange that Penniston's misdated notebook was a latecomer to the Rendlesham narrative, seemingly first mentioned in a magazine interview published in 1996. Crucially, as the English science writer and all-round Rendlesham expert Ian Ridpath has stated, Penniston made no mention of any notes or sketches in the extensive interviews he gave for a British TV programme called Strange But True in July 1994. And so, why conceal it? Unless, of course, it never existed prior to that date. Might it be that the notebook, and quite possibly its owner and others involved in this case, are therefore agents of disinformation? Additionally, reconsidering the radar data and the earlier mentioned testimony of RAF Air Traffic Controller Malcolm Scurrer, one encounters similar controversy. For indeed, although Scurrer's claims of radar anomalies received much airtime in December 1994, he later contradicted his testimony, stating in the 1995 May-June issue of UFO magazine that the anomaly was actually recorded during a training exercise dating to either late October or early November 1980, and thus not the Christmas of the Rendlesham Forest incident. Why then was his original testimony pushed so hard? Or was this change of direction a deliberate act of disinformation meant to sabotage the reputation of the wider case? And such a shift towards conspiracy can be said to become all the more tempting when one considers the multiple Men in Black encounters said to be connected with this case. Writing in another of her books on the MIB phenomenon, Jenny Randles reveals that, at the time of writing, her only intriguing personal episode to speak of was in relation to the Rendlesham case, when a man called Tom Adams requested an interview about the incident. Supposedly, he was making a BBC radio documentary on UFOs. It was autumn 1989, and in particular, Adams seemed very interested in borrowing Randles' first-generation copy of Colonel Halt's tape recording, which Randles had received from a military insider a few years prior. The BBC man, so it seemed, believed the tape to be the original, and would not stop until Randles gave it to him. A copy was not good enough, he is said to have argued when Randles offered him just that. Unwilling to let the tape out of her possession, Randles thus gave the man a different copy, presenting it as the original, stating that she would very much like it returned to her after the BBC was finished with it. Suitably happy, the man left, and was never heard from again. Randles never received her tape back, and when she contacted the BBC, directed to the department named by Tom Adams, she was told no such person of that name existed, and there was no such radio documentary on UFOs scheduled. This was despite the man having provided Jenny Randles with an exact date for the programme. And so Tom Adams appears to have been a ruse to get what he believed was the original Charles Halt tape. Even more incredible than this are the claims made by Randles' co-author and first out-the-gate investigator Brenda Butler. Speaking at a UFO conference in 2015 to mark 35 years since the Rendlesham Forest incident, Butler described how she and her two co-authors had been hounded by Ministry of Defence officials and police. In particular, she claimed that, on one occasion, the MOD tried to force her to sign a contract that would silence her over her findings. Another time, she was supposedly chased by an army jeep down country roads at 80 miles per hour. That same night, she returned to the forest and allegedly captured strange photographic anomalies, all while a police car and police helicopter observed her from a distance. During the conference, Butler even revealed that people had also come to her home and stood in her driveway, trying to intimidate her. In her own words, "We have had phone calls, been followed and threatened." And Brenda Butler is not the only one to have been warned away from Rendlesham Forest. For, in the immediate aftermath of the incident, a public path was blocked by military and police personnel, with Jerry Davis, one of the locals to see a blinding light above the forest, being rudely told to leave the area when he tried to access it on the 29th of December. On top of this, there is much testimony, including from Forestry Commission woodcutters, that relates to how the landing site was hastily cleared of trees after the Christmas period. Some have said that the trees were radioactive. Others have spoken of clear signs of physical impact, as if something had indeed landed or crashed, including what is said to have been a giant crater, which was quickly filled in. It is even strongly suggested that the current UFO trail and art installation to mark the landing site within the forest are incorrect, with a false site having been chosen in the days immediately after the original incident, meant to misdirect visitors away from the patch of forest containing the landing indentations and damaged trees. In many ways, what is said to have happened in the aftermath of Rendlesham is comparable to other, more recent, supposed UFO military cover-ups, including the 2016 Penturk incident. Down the far end of conspiracy, there are even claims of a craft removal having taken place, with it said that there were numerous unscheduled flights coming into the base soon after the incident. The suggestion being that they were there to transport a recovered UFO to the United States for study. And so did aliens visit Rendlesham Forest in December 1980? There are undoubtedly many who would argue that they did. Certainly, even high-ranking military men, including Colonel Halt, believe something of extraterrestrial origin was encountered that Christmas, even if beings themselves were not explicitly seen. To be able to draw any sort of proper conclusion, I would, however, argue that there is still information that must be considered, namely the locational significance of Rendlesham Forest. After all, that area can be said to have a long history of scientific and military research. In the 1930s, Suffolk's Orford Ness, the narrow 90-mile peninsula of lighthouse fame onto which Rendlesham Forest backs, was selected as the test site for Britain's radio-based detection project, namely the development of radar. Later, between 1953 and 1971, the same area was occupied by the Atomic Weapons Research Establishment. Today, the ruins of the site, now owned by the National Trust, are proudly advertised as containing vibration test laboratories, underground bunkers, and many other Cold War goodies. Then, less than 10 miles up the coast, there are the Sizewell nuclear power stations, the first of which was opened in April 1967. In the opposite direction is RAF Bawdsey, also known as the Bawdsey Research Station, a military installation famous for having been a bloodhound missile site, replete with underground control centre, living quarters and air filtration that made it capable of operating during a nuclear attack. The missiles remained until July 1990, meaning it was a site of great national military significance in 1980. Then, finally, within the forested area itself, there were, of course, the two RAF bases, Woodbridge and Bentwaters, operated by the United States Air Force. It is even whispered that the US's National Security Agency was active in the area, working at Orford Ness alongside the CIA on secret research projects known as Cobra Mist and Cold Witness. As recently as March 2022, a spokesperson for the National Trust even conceded there's still a huge amount that we don't know about the site. Indeed, we'll probably never know the work that the buildings and their infrastructure were involved in. And such is precisely the issue that we face when trying to unravel the undeniable mystery that is the Rendlesham Forest incident. Claims of alien beings and extraterrestrial craft can be made all day, and indeed may hold the answer even in part as to what military men and civilians saw that Christmas. But without knowing precisely what the British MOD, the American Air Force, the CIA, and the NSA were working on at the various bases and test sites in that area, we are fumbling in the dark. After all, when one enters the realm of UFOs and ETs, talk of holograms, experimental weapons, secret crafts, ethically dubious experiments, and government psyops are never far behind. And given all of the cover-up and conspiracy which surrounds this case, it is arguably not difficult to believe at least some measure of secret government happenings are to blame for all that occurred. Why else, arguably, would USAF personnel risk a diplomatic faux pas or even outright criminal charges by leaving their base and trespassing on British sovereign soil so as to pursue whatever was going on in Rendlesham Forest those nights? Did they already know what was going on? Did it involve the British? Or did something else happen altogether, and the Rendlesham story is one giant act of government misdirection, propagated by military payroll stooges and decoys? I will leave you with one final story, one which comes yet again from Jenny Randles, the researcher who arguably got the closest to this incredible and complex case. It dates to November 1984, and thus the early days of her research into the Rendlesham incident. She claims to have received a phone call from a Dr. Alan Bond, a specialist in advanced physics and rocketry propulsion, who had done contract work for the MOD. After reading some of Randall's research, the scientist supposedly felt compelled to reach out. After all, according to him, the lights in the sky seen just before the first forest incident were not comets. They were something else, something terrestrial and of huge political sensitivity. In his last phone call to Randall's, he supposedly had this warning to give: "I am heading off to a conference in the Netherlands. When I get back, I will not be taking this any further. You do not know what you have got yourself into. You are messing with something for which you can end up at the bottom of the Thames." And so that would suggest not aliens, or at least not just aliens. The Rendlesham Forest incident is a confusing case, one for which we still do not have the full picture, and one which I very much doubt we ever will. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe for more of the paranormal, not forgetting that there is more content for you to enjoy over on my second channel, Laura Roughton. And if I don't see you again before the 25th, have a truly wonderful, truly magical Merry Christmas. Until next time,